Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar series, Navigating Business in 2021. I'm your host, Don Steyer, and I really look forward to today's discussion, Strategic Foresight, which is about preparing alternative futures, bringing together domain experts, tools, and techniques and technologies that allow you to gather information that's necessary to influence your future or create contingencies that enable your organization to respond, vice react to change. But before we get started, WBB is excited to now be part of the Circo family. So you may hear us refer to ourselves as both WBB or Circo WBB or Circo throughout the conversation. When you joined GoToMeeting, your mic was automatically muted and your video was not shared. And for any questions or thoughts you may want to share, please use the Q&A feature on your screens. You can submit questions throughout the presentation. And if we don't get to your question live, we'll send you a message following the webinar. And we'll also send you notes from today's presentation, including any resources we may reference. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Mr. Brian Coppersmith, who's an expert in this field of foresight. He's got more than 30 years working as an advocate for innovation, working in change management and organizational strategy. He's written business strategy for the Army's Rapid Equipment Force, and served on the overarching planning team at the Office of Secretary of Defense for Acquisition Strategy. He recently led a team that wrote the General Strategic Foresight model for the Navy Surgeon General. And recently, we've kind of engaged him to apply foresight to support digital transformations in government, industry, and commercial organizations. So Brian, thanks for coming today. Thanks for taking the time, and over to you.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it. So in the literature that led up to this event, we said that it's sometimes true, actually often true, that leaders, when they think of the future, if they do, they'll often approach it from a disadvantaged perspective, episodic sampling, frivolous speculation, or even outright fear. Strategic foresight is a field, we call it foresight for short, that offers structured, accurate appreciations of the future and brings discipline to looking to the long view. We want you to go away today with three things from this discussion. One, why foresight is necessary. Two, how it works, a little bit briefly. And three, how foresight can benefit your organization. In overarching terms, foresight, in qualitative terms, foresight will do three things for your outfit. It'll make you more competitive, more resilient, and more efficient. Big change is coming. You may have noticed that we're experiencing historic rates of change. Innovation, the process of developing new ideas, products, and methods, is running at an ever-increasing pace. At the same time, the natural environment is changing in unprecedented ways as well. Our research indicates that changes to the operating environment in the next 10 to 15 years may well dwarf the rate of change in any similar time horizon in recorded history. Things are going to keep changing much faster and much bigger, and changing across a broad range of natural activity and human endeavor. Talent management and the future of work in the workplace, science and technology, policy, distributed networks, the great power competition, the way in which citizens interact with their governments, and even human beings interact with their civilization. More, bigger, longer-lived wildfires, high tides, and rainfall events are all on the move. The type and scale of these changes will affect the way we do business and the business that we do. Recently, COVID has created a surge of interest in organizations looking to the long view. Leaders have been snapped into focus. They see in highly granular ways the value of being prepared for low likelihood but high impact events. Some leaders have been in crisis response mode for a year and a half straight, careening from house fire to house fire. Many of them would welcome ways to manage the uncertainty of hinge events, such as the pandemic and its associated fallout. Dr. Peter Skoblik, who does great work at Harvard in foresight, wrote an article in the Washington Post in March. It's a comprehensive treatment of need for foresight in government, including and especially at the White House. But from that long article, which is really a fantastic treatment, I encourage you to read it, and we'll provide you the assets after this briefing is over, all of our resources and citations. And he says, when we spend more time asking what if, such as creating contingencies, right, and addressing alternative futures. We can spend less time asking what now. And that speaks to this cascade demand of leaders to respond with spontaneous action to this drumbeat of surprise events. But in point of fact, those surprises are knowable. Where does foresight come from? A little bit of history. It's not a brand new field. It's been around for a while. That practitioners and theorists that inform the effort are constantly refining methods and processes. But it goes back a ways. So orienting your attention first to the left side of this photo montage. That's a nuclear test, specifically the Castle Bravo shot in Bikini Atoll in 1954. Herman Kahn used scenarios to think the unthinkable and achieved significant success in nuclear nonproliferation in the 1950s in the Eisenhower administration. Royal Dutch Shell in the mid-60s in his long-range studies group in his London office created a report to 2020 to successfully forecast such things as the 1973 Arab oil embargo and the advent and implications of climate change. NASA, during the Apollo years, asked the University of Houston to create a space-based information center to project and gain an appreciation for the long time horizon for its activities. And closer to home in government, in the Coast Guard, in 1998, began a long-range planning activity that evolved into a steady-state strategic foresight program called Project Evergreen. And it serves as the gold standard in strategic foresight in government to this day. The director of Project Evergreen has stated that it was the strategic foresight contingency planning products and artifacts that, quote, kept the Coast Guard from breaking during the Deepwater Horizon's oil spill. So how do you do it? This diagram is fantastic. We credit Dr. Hines and Dr. Bishop and Mr. Worrell at the University of Houston for it, and it deserves some setup. So we depict the past and the appreciation of the future across a continuum from left to right, right? And on the far right, the big takeaway from the process is decisions that leaders make to put into their integrated strategic approach, decisions that they can make about their organization now that'll have positive outcomes in the long time horizon. A chief additional feature of this is you can affect your ecosystem, your operating environment, take action outside of your organization to influence your future as well. So it starts with, like every problem-solving activity, some diagnosis, creating a domain map. A domain can be any activity, it can be any subject, right? It might be your organization's future, the future of your industry, the future of your transactional environment, a subset, a product line, a policy, or what have you. The domain map is an artifact that includes a research question, an identification of scope, what's in, what's out of your looking for useful information, an appreciation of historical forces of change. That leads you to the current assessment, what brought you to where you are. And then a next phase, really the operative element where you're shoveling the coal, so to speak, in this process is horizon scanning. It's our term for open source research that you conduct looking for indicators of disruption in the forecast. We call these faint signal or weak signal indicators, right? What dim lights in the dark or still voices in the wilderness point to variance in the forecast. When you're scanning, you begin to form an appreciation for things that are more certain and things that are less certain, but still plausible. Elements that are more certain are things like published plans and projections by chief stakeholders and heavy hitters in the domain or its transactional environment, right? That populates a thing called the baseline future. Well, that wasn't good. The baseline future, which is depicted by this red arrow right here, right? It's the quote expected future, right? And that's heavy with caveats because the expected future will of course change as well, but it's a very useful principle fulcrum around which we hang the rest of this activity, right? So the certainty is established by plans and projections. Uncertainty can be informed by such things as issues, right? The polar positions taken by legitimate analytical perspectives of experts in the field that have different forecasts about how a thing may come out. Let's take artificial intelligence and related technologies, for instance. There are some who assert legitimately that artificial intelligence and related technologies may disrupt the workplace and eliminate up to 50% of jobs in the next 15 years. Bad for the economy, bad for people, bad for the tax base, bad. There's another camp that holds that although it may be true that certain elements of tasks may be taken over by artificial intelligence, that everybody will have a little bit of it. And even if there's a little downside risk to artificial intelligence, we can scarcely imagine the positive impact of artificial intelligence on humankind and human condition in years to come. So it's worth the risk, right? Particularly if we can control that risk, right? Dr. Andrew McAfee at MIT asserts that artificial intelligence and related technology may be as significant as the Industrial Revolution. Where the Industrial Revolution freed us from the limits of muscle power, artificial intelligence and related technologies may free us from the limits of the human mind. Not that we'll lose our mind, not that we'll lose our agency, not that we'll lose our accountability, transparency. We can control this thing because we'll be creating it. We have to. But you can't help but be optimistic, in his words. You can't help but be optimistic with a possibility like that. You have to grab onto it. So that's an example of the kinds of issues that can inform alternative futures, right? It's useful to know, it's very important to assert that we're not trying to divine the true future and separate out from a host of imposters. No, that's not the point. What we're trying to do is establish a cone of plausibility. So if it goes one way or another, we establish anticipated levels of maturity in a Loxton diagram, right? The focus implications tracking that we call it. Maybe that's a little bit too technical, but we can anticipate if this, then that, right? If this thing achieves a certain maturity level in my anticipated future, then I'm going to devote resources to it, right? I'm going to leverage this opportunity, right? If it looks like it's going to go more the other way, I'll devote resources to that. It's a wonderful long range foretelling of eventuality. So in the scanning, you identify trends and trends bundles. That leads you to an appreciation of what's making them happen, the drivers, right? If you carry out the slope and the curve, if you will, of those drivers, those forces of change, they help inform the alternative futures. Still, all that is just appreciating what's happening, what's going on, and a little bit of anticipation. Where the magic happens in this process is where you describe these alternative futures and scenarios. These are stories, they're narratives, and you put these in front of stakeholders, domain experts from the organization concerned. Typically, we do this in a 2-day-long offsite. And in this offsite, these breakout groups, typically 10 to 16, maybe 20 people in 4 groups, they look at the baseline, the alternative futures, and they identify the implications. Through the lens of their analytical perspective, how are the alternative futures, right, going to have impact on their organization, right? Assuming that they're actually, you know, as a counterfactual, that they're true, right, as an intellectual exercise. Those implications, through an algorithm that we've developed, inform options for the leadership, right? The options, the implications can be examined from a perspective of what are the most likely, what are the most important, you know, what are the ones that the leadership must pay attention to in the opinion of these domain experts. What are the most provocative, and which implications are those for which the organization is least prepared. In a sequence of identify, aggregate, prioritize, and down select over and over, the consultant group or the strategy leadership from within the organization goes to leadership, the director, the commander, the executive team, the C-suite, and says, boss, this is what we recommend that you do. From the dozens and hundreds of implications that we've identified, these 6, 5, 7, a handful of these implications you take and you make recommendations for leveraging them as opportunities or deflecting them as threats. And that brings you back to the X's and O's sort of symbol here, borrowed from football, of what the organization is going to do now to have positive effects on its future. Now, the idea of all this speaks to the preferred future. What is it that you have as a vision for your ecosystem, its transactional environment, and your domain? What is it you want to have happen? And a corollary to that is, what's the preventable future? What are the things you don't want to have happen? With that in mind, in the key element of this diagram, this yellow region here, what are those things that you want to have happen? This allows you to bend the future to the good fortunes of the organization. That's powerful stuff, but we stand by it. It's not hyperbolic, it's really true. Okay, now that's a lot. You know, that's a lots and lots and lots of theory distilled down into kind of a complex diagram. After years of practicing foresight, I I found an interesting phrase, and it goes like this. Foresight in its process does two things. It maps change and it influences change. If you take that away from this, you will have one on the day. Okay, how do we know that foresight does good things? You know, it's hard to establish an accounting line that goes directly to last quarter's profits about foresight because it's long range. Well, history is one way. On top, you've got some stellar performers. You know, IBM and Disney for decades identified variance in the forecast and ways that their ecosystems, their markets, and their potentialities are going to change, and they've adapted, right, very successfully. And on the lower left, you see some folks who didn't hustle as much with the consequences that we all know happened to those firms, right? The parallel between Netflix and Blockbuster is deliberate. We both know what happened there. Most of these are household names, but I put a few in here to be a little bit more obscure. Have a look at Klockner and Company, a 110-year-old firm that deployed foresight and put itself at the center of a digital network, right? And others at the lower left, the Bombardier story is a cautionary tale for firms. Okay, another way to tell the value of foresight. I'm asked by leaders, I'm asked by C-suite members, I'm asked by analysts and consultants, what's the return on investment of strategic foresight? So looking at a study performed by researchers in the EU, they identified much higher profit, much higher growth levels, as shown there in those orange icons, and the performance discount of firms that are futures deficient of triple digits, right? In civil environments, in nonprofit, it's service to customers, service to beneficiaries rather than profit. And in the military, it's about readiness, right? Strategic foresight leads to high levels of operational readiness. Okay, told you who was doing foresight, now who is doing foresight. From a study a couple of years ago by the Institute for the Future, 63 of Fortune 500 companies, 32 of insurgents, including Uber, Yelp, and others, and 23 elements within government. It's some stage of government. Now, it's far from a saturated field in the federal government. We've got a long way to go to reach a critical level of foresight in government, but there are some bright lights out there. GAO, Secret Service, the Office of Personnel Management are all extraordinarily high-functioning foresight capabilities. I'm proud to say this is the icon for the Navy Surgeon General, the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. We feel that our program is as strong as any, the program that we built for them. Incidentally, within the scope of that project, we helped the Defense Health Agency Director create a new strategic foresight program. We're very proud of the influence there. We wrote an info paper and decision document in concert with our Air Force Medical Service colleagues, and they are now starting a brand new strategic foresight capability there, staffed with up to about 8 government folks. I don't mean to slight anyone who's not on this list. Forest Service has a fantastic program, EPA, and CDC just sent 65 or so folks, as I understand, to the University of Houston program in the last year and a half or so. All right, I was asked in the last couple of weeks, who does high leverage outcomes, right? Budgets can be declining, particularly in government, but also in the commercial sector. COVID may have hit you hard. How do you do more with less? You cannot. We learned from sequestration that you cannot do more with less, but you can do a lot with not very much. So what's an example there? Going far afield, you know, and this is another example of how do you know foresight works, because the city-state of Singapore, which is tiny island group country on the end of the Malay Peninsula with 2 causeways that connect them to land, 270 square miles of land area, which is about the size of Columbus, Ohio. They didn't have anything really to go with. They have no commodities, they have no natural resources, right? You know, very little to expect that they could do well with. But look at them now. They're the Geneva of Southeast Asia. Why? Because they leveraged opportunity, leveraged the resources that they have, and they have a very multimodal solution to everything. They deploy foresight at the highest level, cascades through the government, and they have a monthly, quarterly, and annual foresight scenarios events that inform their future, including a node that collects information from a wide range of of categories, and they share it among themselves. But even more important, the decisions that they make to put into integrated strategic plan has them doing addressing multiple categories with the resources that they have all the time. And as a result, they've really achieved a tremendous amount with very few resources. So that's a quick treatment of it. That brings us around to the Q&A section. We hope that you found this useful, why foresight is necessary, a little bit about how to do it, and then how it provides value and utility to the organization. So Don, over to you.
So Brian, thank you so much for that overview of foresight. And we're getting questions in from the audience, and if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A section, and we'll answer them as they come, as we have time available. But here's the first question. This was actually from me, because this was near and dear. As you know, we're working with a lot of clients right now based on huge budget uncertainty moving into the next couple of years within government. And then that budget uncertainty is really, it's going to become critical because of the amount of spending and new priorities that we currently have. So how does foresight, or how would I use foresight to help me not only understand the near term, but also really the longer term impacts of budget decisions I make today, how they'll impact me?
Well, that's a great question, Don. So foresight, by its very function, looks long, right? And in a thing that we work with is a critical member of our team creates a Loxton diagram, right? This is an anticipation of maturity of something that right now may only be a nascent idea or may only be experimental. But you create these anticipations of maturity and say, when it hits this milestone, I'll devote attention and money to it. And it's long enough out that it gets you past that terrible 2-year period where you've got to rearrange year of execution money in government and similar kind of limits in funding and revenue streams in the commercial sector. And it gives you a long enough view where you can say now, okay, I'm going to devote money in the program objective memorandum or the president's budget or my overarching CFO's budget to devote money because I see this thing maturing. It allows you an appreciation of flexibility and acquisition for milestones. It allows you an appreciation of wholeness, which is a concept of connecting systems and subsystems to those adjacent to it and up and down in verticals about how systems connect to other systems, allowing for you to spend money wisely, right? Getting back to the money piece. Knowing how the POM works, knowing how the annual budget works, foresight gets you way out in front of that. And incidentally, that's the holy grail of strategic planning, right? It's to connect your decisions to the budget, right? I know Secret Service, they don't really consider something. If it doesn't affect the budget, it's not worth talking about, right? At that echelon 1, echelon 2 level. So it's both an important demand of foresight and also a very useful outcome of the process.
I hear what you're saying, but there's a lot of methodologies out there, right? There's TQM, TQL, there's Six Sigma, there's Lean, there's Agile, there's you name it. There's a lot of things out there, many of which the processes and the underlying techniques have been around for a while, but they're reformulated to really teach it better and give people a more streamlined process. How's foresight different?
So it's a great question. So high reliability organizational principles, total quality management, Lean Six Sigma, those things you mentioned, they're all very useful. They're sterling approaches in management that add to the outcomes of the organization. But they reach a level of efficiency, the maximum level of efficiency. So 2 things about foresight. 1, it's an additional tool to add efficiency in addition to and as a complement of those other things. But it's also deployable by just a few people. If the CEO, director, commander, or principal of any organization brings his chief lieutenants into a room and says, okay, we're going to do this foresight thing, half a dozen people can have spectacularly positive impact on the organization. That's how it's different.
Okay, no, good. So the ability to connect those processes to alternative futures and do the what if, right? And understand that planning cycle. Okay, that makes sense, which would ultimately then roll right back to your budget. How much money would it take to do that, right? So, okay,
Right.
that makes a whole lot of sense. So here we go. In general terms, what should we consider when assessing the if in foresight? When assessing if, sorry, I'm reading the question. It's really small, and I'm trying not to wear my glasses.
Yeah.
um, foresight capability can contribute to upcoming projects across any of our five. Or how can things come up in terms of projects? How can you look at individual projects or portfolios of projects?
So let me consider the question a minute. In my experience with projectization of the strategy in the organization that we work with as a client side support. So foresight creates an appreciation of our alternatives, right? As I've just stated. And so if you have an anticipation of where you want to go as a vision, right, you can put together a string of capability that's more than just a year out, right? You can put together this train of projectized initiatives with work streams, work breakdown structure, work packages that are very granular. And you have metrics that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound based on your appreciation of what's coming down the road, right? You can devote additional resources to that: manpower, money, time, or a butt chewing. If something's not going well, you can kill it, or one of the seniors in your organization can call up even somebody outside your organization. What time between now and next Thursday are you going to have my stuff? You're interfering with my timeline. So foresight can provide an appreciation of milestones and acquisition. It can provide an appreciation of metrics and a cascade of tasks that has to go on, so you can get out of this constant restart every beginning of every fiscal year where projects only survive for 11 months and 29 days.
So through that what if scenario planning, what I think I heard you say was, if I have a long-term vision, I have versions of alternative futures, some higher probability than others.
Yeah.
I have really want that future to be, and then I have projects in a portfolio that are aligned to those. Then it allows my organization to be more adaptive.
Yeah, for sure. So an example of that is a great crystallization of thought. So let's say something is a lower level of likelihood, but it's still plausible, right? So you create a plan of action and milestones for that. You create the prototype as a contingency, but you don't necessarily pull the trigger. You don't have to pull the trigger, but the planning's there. And if you see the evolution of indicators that this thing's actually going to go down, though it may not be a highly probable event, you've done the groundwork, you've established the cost-benefit analysis, established the priority and necessary, and even if you do have to execute variance in the year of execution of your budget, you've done the thinking already, and you're not caught by surprise. Let's dust off this plan. Remember, we talked about this in a scenarios event 6 months ago. Here it comes. Let's do it.
Okay.
You can do that without actually funding everything full bore.
All right. So if fully implemented, okay, 5 years ago, how would foresight have impacted a company's 2020, 2021 response to COVID-19? I know this is a question you get all the time. I know I've actually asked you this question at least 3 or 4 times. So it's a great here and now. Had I been prepared for it, what could have happened?
Let's say you have a appreciation of the hinge event. Some people, there's wild cards and black swans. We've talked about the definition of each one of those. Bottom line is, we know this could be coming. We had Ebola, we had SARS, we had MERS, we had another Ebola outbreak. Navy medicine was fundamental in the 2014-16 gig and in handling that. This is not a surprise. Shame on those who didn't see this coming. So if you had a scenarios event a while back, and it's astonishing how much action, reaction, counteraction analysis leads you to certain tasks. Like, if that's true, then we need to make sure that everybody's got the ability to go home and do work and dial up, and has a computer, has access, and has an air bridge or whatever you need to get on the internet to exchange, and that our capacity, all those considerations could be thought out in a scenario exercise. It probably didn't need to take more than a couple of days.
That was a great answer.
That's how we could have done it in 5 years ago.
Sure. Sure. And for everybody, we're out of time, but thank you for joining us today. If we didn't get your question, there were a lot of questions, mostly around artificial intelligence and data transformation. We'll get back to you on those. Brian and his team will answer those directly. We'll send you notes from today's presentation shortly, including any resources we referenced, as well as links to the YouTube channel where you can actually see this recording again. We look forward to seeing you next month, where we'll continue the webinar series with performance management, and that makes a difference. It'll be an interview style webinar. We'll explore those best practices of how to talk to prepare your folks and have a good interaction in terms of performance management. Again, thank you very much, and we'll see you next month, third Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern.